What are the best rogue Yu-Gi-Oh decks post YCS Sydney and regional events alike? Big dog, some crazy things have happened over the last weekend that has completely shaken up our tier list. And today we're going to be going over things that I got right, things that I got wrong, and some important changes that you need to know. Of course, as always, if you think I missed a particular strategy, go ahead and let me know down below in the comment section. And if I don't include it into my next tier list, I'll try my best to answer your comments down below. Let's go ahead and jump on in. Okay, big dog, as you can see, we got 5 different categories here, and we are going to be ranking these rogue Yu-Gi-Oh strategies based on a very simple method. The first thing is we are going to be taking into account on how good are these Yu-Gi-Oh rogue strategies against the top meta Yu-Gi-Oh decks. We'll also be taking into account how powerful these strategies are in some of the most popularly played cards. In case you were wondering, the best deck in Yu-Gi-Oh right now is Snake Eyes Fire King, or I would probably say closer to Snake Eyes, and some of the most popularly played cards: Effect Veiler, Infinite Impermanence, and Ghost Mortar. You gotta watch out for those monster effect negations, and of course, Dimension Shifter. Ah, yes, Dimension Shifter. So not only will these rogue strategies will be vying to be able to beat the top spot, they also have to fight for positioning with each other, and that's going to play a huge part on where these strategies sit. I'm not saying that you can't win with any of these strategies on the tier list. All I'm saying is that it's a little bit harder the lower we play these strategies on the rogue list. Let's go ahead and start off with Scareclaw. Scareclaw is a really fun Yu-Gi-Oh strategy, being able to summon powerful monsters like Scareclaw Trigard, which is just a worse Baguska. Unfortunately, we are in a link-based Yu-Gi-Oh format, so I gotta put it in God damn you rogue, which essentially means that this strategy is going to be one of the harder strategies to use to be able to compete. Let's be real, most of the Scareclaw cards suck. The level 3 monsters don't necessarily do anything when you compare them to the level 1 Snake Eyes monsters, so you're already at a huge disadvantage. And while I did actually make a powerful Scareclaw deck that you can use, in spite of that, it still will struggle in this format with tons of hand traps. Moving on, we got Rescue Ace. I'm in danger. Ironically, I have a ton of playtesting against Rescue Ace, and Top Deck TJ has been playing this deck for almost 2 months straight. And I know for a fact, Mr. King of X4, he's in that skill diff, cause I be diffing, bro. The problem with Rescue Ace is some of the most powerful and popularly played cards are effect negators. Using those to be able to stop Rescue Ace turbulence, you down bad. It's almost like nothing else in the deck matters, which means you have to be an incredibly good Yu-Gi-Oh player. You just have to skill diff your opponent to be able to earn those wins. Dinos. Dinos are actually in an interesting situation. One thing I have noticed is that some players are starting to play Ash less. That's good. The next thing I notice is that Miscellaneous Eras go crazy in a combo format. Unfortunately though, Miscellaneous Eras is at 1 and it's pretty hard to get into. I think Dinos for that reason are a little bit hard to play, meaning that at times this deck can feel incredibly powerful, but you're being snuffed out by one particular thing, and this particular time it's the ban list in itself. Free misc. Centurion. Centurion is a Yu-Gi-Oh deck that can thrive in hand trap formats because you can play upwards to 24 hand traps inside of your deck. The only problem with Centurion is that those monster effect negators, yeah, they pretty decent. I think once Centurion gets the new support, it'll be a lot stronger, but for right now, you can center eye on a new strategy if you think you're just gonna get free wins with a hot red dragon Archfiend Calamity. Players are just too smart, and the deck does struggle sometimes when it does get its combo disrupted. And best believe, ironically, tons of people are playing ways to be able to disrupt your combo. Moving on to Unchain. Oh, this one's hard. I think Unchain is a lot better than what people give it credit. This deck does not lose to Dimension Shifter. In all actuality, Dimension Shifter does nothing, meaning that this deck can main or side. Also, cards like the effect negation cards kind of suck against the deck. Promethean Princess isn't good. It may be my copium, but I think that this deck is a solid choice. One of the best players in the world just so happens to have got first place with this deck, and I think it's an indication that the deck is still strong into Yu-Gi-Oh! It actually does have quite the few desirable matchups and probably would still be considered the best deck in the game if Shavara didn't get limited. Right now, I would say it is a solid choice. Dragons! My guy, I know some players that want this deck Dragon. I think the bestial monsters are a lot stronger than what people give it credit. Yes, we are in a fire format, but being able to banish your opponent's monsters like Link Karibo in their graveyard is huge. This deck eats most hand traps lunch like it isn't anything until you go through 2 hand traps, Droll, and Shifter. I'm gonna go ahead and put this deck in skill depth. The biggest reason why I can't put it in solid choice or best rogue is because of the limitations on the ban list. I'm telling you, if those limitations were off, we just might be playing Dragon Link. But with the limits, the deck is incredibly skillful and you have to know what you're doing to be able to succeed. Voiceless Voice. Like seriously guys, the deck doesn't have a voice, but there's a voice. What is it, like whispering? Telekinesis? Voiceless Voice has the ability to play whatever package you want to be able to defeat some of the toughest cards and can play around those effect negation cards that I just mentioned due to Serratus. This deck is just kind of crazy. It is probably the 3rd best deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now. The reason why it's even in the Rogue tier list is, well, because we're in a tier 0 format. Voiceless Voice's position hasn't changed, but unfortunately, Yugioh has. I think Yugioh having success in the beginning of the event was probably in part of Yu-Gi-Oh! Players not reading. Yugioh players, let's be real, how many times has your opponent entered the battle phase and haven't read Nightmare Pain? Be real, I played Yugioh enough to know. I would currently put Yugioh in goddamn you rogue boy. Some of the biggest problems with Yugioh is easily consistency, though the deck is getting more support to be able to fix that. Vanquished Soul. Vanquished Soul coming off the heels of a top 32 YCS. Sheesh. That leaves the big question, where would I put Vanquished Soul because of this? I think Vanquished Soul is a solid choice, maybe even a skill depth. The problem with Vanquished Soul still remains. This deck has the ability to be able to outplay your opponent, but you also have to be able to outplay your opponent. I have to say, this is one of the most fair Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks in probably the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! But that's also why it's so good. It's always going to be competitive, and it's always going to be able to compete. Phantom Knights. Yeah, my boy, we might as well just go ahead and pack that one up. Unfortunately, Phantom Knights don't do anything incredibly powerful right now. To be fair, they also don't lose ridiculously hard to, well, yeah, the effect negation cards can suck at the right times. It might be a little bit of an understatement to put Phantom Knights in goddamn you rogue, but in all honesty, there's no real reason to want to play this deck versus playing a different deck. I would go ahead and say that tier limits are incredibly hard to play. Tier limits like dinos, well, not like dinos. Tier limits were actually fairly hit on the ban list. Who would have guessed? Unfortunately, just like the Avatar, when we needed tier limits the most to be able to check out the tier 0 meta, because the Ishizu Shuffler cards would have ironically been good, they vanished. I think that the deck has tons of opportunities to be able to counter the fire deck. I mean, it is tier limit, but unfortunately right now, due to the certain ban list, it's a little bit hard to play. Labyrinth. Oh God, you guys are gonna be in shambles when I put Labyrinth. Ironically, Labyrinth has all of the tools to be one of the most successful decks post the ban list. 1, it didn't get hit by the ban list. 2, its enemies got hit by the ban list. But there's 3. The secret hand trap right now is Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion. Players are remaining 3 Ash, 3 Bell, and Labyrinth. Probably one of the worst case scenarios for this deck. I'm gonna put it in hard to play. Now, by all means, these decks have a lot in common. They're really good in the right player's hands. But unfortunately, because of the meta, whether it be ban list or particular cards being played, these strategies become really, really hard to play and require your skill. Pearly. Yes. The deck that purrs. It can play yes amount of hand drops and can shuffle cards back into the deck. It can also make Divine Arsenal, Double Zeus, as well as make your monsters untargetable due to its field spell. Well, that plays around most of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Strategies this day. Pearly is one of the most slept on Yu-Gi-Oh! Strategies, and I talked about it in yesterday's video. It is a crazy good deck that can play a ton of interruptions and has the right recipe to be able to counter some of the best decks in the game, as well as some of the other rogue decks. This deck laughs at Dimension Shifter when you play it correct. Now, ironically, Orcus has been doing a lot better than Phantom Knights and even Tier Lament. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in hard to play still. The biggest problem with Orcus is that the deck is significantly power crept still. Maybe if we get Harp Horror to 3, that changes? Maybe? But for right now, the deck doesn't do anything significant to warrant it anything other than too hard to play. Synchron, my boy. Oh my God. I remember when this deck was the bee's knees. Unfortunately, it's closer to the knees than the bees. I'm gonna put it in, God damn you rogue. Synchron gets hand trapped to death in a hand trap format. It will not be able to survive, unfortunately. Sprite. Shout out to my man Jimmy MDC for inviting me over on that track. It was crazy. I would go ahead and put Sprite in skill diff now. I think the biggest change about Sprite is that yes, you still lose to big monsters, but those hand traps and some of the more powerful cards, they don't frighten you at all, do they? Also, seeing that Snake Eyes summons monsters on your side of the field, resolving Gigantic Sprite never felt so good. Ninjas, my boy, they actually did get a top. I ain't gonna lie, whoever topped with ninjas, I'm proud of you, my boy. Continue on with the ninja way. But to everybody else, you already know, this deck might be in goddamn you rogue. Can't necessarily put it there because ninjas have a unique ability to be able to tribute your opponent's ninja monsters. You turn their monsters into ninjas and also flip your opponent's cards face down. In the correct circumstances, this deck can be a complete terror. I think that plants, whether it's Rika Arrowmage, 60 card Rika Arrowmage, is a solid choice Yu-Gi-Oh deck. The deck has so many ways to be able to play around its choke points that you would present to it and still make a really satisfying board. It can also go second in this Yu-Gi-Oh meta and break some boards fairly well. Our plant player Lance actually just got his invite using this deck and he was going crazy the whole event. Goaty. Woo! I'm gonna go ahead and put Goaty. Goaty isn't goddamn you rogue, my boy. Look, I'm not here to offend the fish people, but let's be honest. This deck ain't cutting it right now. And what's crazy is that I actually had some real hope for Goaty. This strategy could be good. Being able to synchro summon into Goaty deep beyond on your opponent's turn, crazy. But unfortunately for Goaty, it seems like it's power crept even though it just got support. The deck is still waiting on the right pilot, the right meta, and maybe a couple of more cards to make it incredibly competitive. Now, you guys did ask me where would I put Dark Magician on the Rogue tier list, and I'm gonna put it in, God damn you Rogue. Yugi's strategy is not making it out of the basement, unfortunately. This strategy is severely power crept. Solomon Great. I've actually had the pleasure of playing against Solomon Great, testing against it, and also seeing it top multiple events. And the biggest reason is because you have monsters like Solomon Great Foxy to be able to break cards like Summon Limit, but more importantly, you use Promethean Princess the correct way. I'm gonna put Solomon Great into solid choice. It may be copium, but I'm brewing up something solid for you, my boy. This deck could be the sauce. Branded may be considered brain dead by most Yu-Gi-Oh players, but I think this is a really powerful rogue Yu-Gi-Oh strategy. Granted, the showings of this deck have been dropping just a little bit, but this is still a really powerful contender that most people prepare for. It's the reason why people are playing Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring inside of the deck, and it's not because of the strongest decks in the game. Branded is still incredibly good at being able to dodge effect negation cards through Blazing Cartesia, as well as play around Dimension Shifter. It is one of the best rogue Yu-Gi-Oh decks in the game. Marine Sus. Hey man, 20 hand traps, World Sea Dragon Sea Lances. Yeah, this deck's still solid. Not gonna lie, if I put it any lower, Hoodley just may have came after me. But overall, Marine Sus has 1 card combos and tons of hand traps. Do you know any other decks in the meta that does that? Yeah, this deck's incredibly solid, and it's really nice to be able to see the cyber strategies making some representation. I'm gonna go ahead and put Sword Soul in the skill diff category. Bro, when I'm talking about power creep, sheesh. On top of that, players are still playing Nibiru too, which is kind of ironic because these two Cybers decks have ways to play around Nibiru now, but this deck still don't, other than hope to summon Brother on the floor first. Heroes, I am also going to drop them down a rung into the skill diff category. We actually have my man Brandon Orky playing heroes, and he was cooking Fire King players till he got trolled. Swear to God, I told you, we're never beating those allegations. Heroes is actually one of those incredibly solid Yu-Gi-Oh decks that can do a ton of great things. It just needs the right player's hands and maybe a little bit of luck, just like this much, because players shouldn't be playing Droll anymore. Manadium. Remember when I just said players shouldn't be playing Droll anymore? Well, Manadium can play around Shifter and most hand negations. What a decent hand. I'm gonna go ahead and put Manadium into solid choice. I think it's kind of like Vanquish Soul. This is a strategy that is really good the better you are as a player. Unlike some other strategies where you just have to be incredibly skilled, these strategies actually reward you for playing skillfully and playing around your opponent's interrupts. Dogmatica. Yes, the dogs. No, in all honesty, this is a semblance of stun. There have been players that are playing barrier statues, Dogmatica's Moon Mirror Shield. It's pretty bad when decks like this are some of the best rogue Yu-Gi-Oh decks. This strategy simply counters the meta. It counters a lot of cards being used right now and is one of the better options that you can play in the Yu-Gi-Oh right now. Just expect to lose a lot of friends. I would also say if you're trying to be a little less toxic, Chimera is probably your man. It's one of the better rogue decks that people aren't gonna go, ugh, every single time they play you, but if you've been playing Master Duel, you might get that. Chimera does have all of the abilities to play around Shifter. The effect negations can play Shifter, but more importantly, in a simplified game state, you ruin your opponent. So simplify the game state. Raid Raptor. I've been high on Raid Raptors for quite some time, but I think it's time for me to come down on the deck. It is a hard to play Yu-Gi-Oh deck, and it's for a couple of reasons. The effect negation cards are crazy good against Raid Raptor. And before you guys say, wait, Callie, you could just play Raider's Wing. Bro, you're not always going to open Raider's Wing, unfortunately. I personally think that just right now isn't the particular meta for Raid Raptors, though it is a hard deck to play. And before you guys start saying, no, these decks are not in order. Yeah. Yeah. And then, I mean, goddamn you, Rogue. Does it really matter, my boy? Next, Fluundereese. Fluundereese is probably the second best deck, but again, you got that problem. Do you want to have friends? And I think the craziest thing is that Fluundereese players are actually taking a page out of Stun's book. I've seen a lot of them play Fossil Dyna Pachycephalo. You're busted. Using its flip effect to destroy all your opponent's monsters. You cook it. I would put Chimera into the hard to play. Right now, in this particular format, with the cards that are being played, this deck will genuinely struggle. But overall, I don't think that this is a terrible Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Sharks just got a top 32 at the YCS. And the reasoning was simple. You're able to take the Flame Beurge with the effect of your Big Shark Exceed monster, your Armored Exceed card. I'm going to go ahead and put this strategy in skill diff. My bad, Shark players. You're a little bit better than I thought. The deck is still reliant somewhat on Goes in Match, and if that card was at 3, probably would put Sharks a little bit higher. But for right now, Sharks do seem to have all of the answers for just about everything. It just depends on how good you are as a player to be able to navigate through it. Dark World, my boy. Yeah, bro, you rogue. Don't argue with me. Argue with your mama. Dark World is not happening right now. It don't matter what you trying to say right here. And Galaxy Eyes. Oh, I've been getting a lot of Galaxy Eyes players that say, Callie, I'm wrong, but yeah. Bro, you rogue too. You're not going anywhere. You're not escaping these allegations. Unfortunately, these decks are both A, power crept, B, have a very, very amazing fan base that unfortunately are in Delulu land, but C, aren't strong enough in the current Yu-Gi. And that's all that I have for my rogue tier list. I really hope and want to know what you guys have to say about these placings. Of course, if you want to see more amazing content, you already know what to do. Check out these videos so I can catch you on the next one.